The 22nd of November to the 13th of December 1975 saw the transmission of The Android Invasion, written by Terry Nation and directed by Barry Letts. The viewing figures reached the highest of season 13, with Part 3 gaining 12.1 million and Part 2 gaining the lowest of the story with 11.3 million. Although Terry Nation had written and co-written 10 Doctor Who stories since 1963, only The Keys of Marinus from season 1 omitted his most famous creations, the Daleks. Nation had an informal agreement with the Doctor Who production team at the time to provide one Dalek serial per season, the most recent of these being Genesis of the Daleks. When it came time to discuss Nation's contribution to season 13, however, he was made aware that producer Philip Hinchcliffe and script editor Robert Holmes were far less interested in spotlighting old monsters than their predecessors had been. Instead, Nation began work on two non-Dalek storylines, the first entitled The Enemy Within, and was commissioned on November 29, 1974, while the other, called Return to Sue Cannon, was requested on February 13, 1975. The second idea appears to have been abandoned, but on February 27th, Nation was contracted to provide full scripts for The Enemy Within, now under the title of The Kraals. Originally, a key plot element was the Kraal androids were going to be mirror images of the people they were imitating, and this was how the Doctor deduced that Sarah Jane was actually a robot in episode 2. It was eventually decided that this would be too technically demanding to realise, and the action was suitably amended. Nation envisaged the Kraals as somewhat insectoid in appearance, although this idea was not used in the final design work. Around the start of July, the adventure's title reverted back to The Enemy Within and was classified as Serial 4J. At about the same time, it was learned that Nicholas Courtney would not be able to reprise his role as Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart in the story because of obligations to a theatrical tour. With the start of production looming, Holmes replaced Lethbridge Stewart with a new character called Colonel Faraday, to be played by Patrick Newell. Originally, Faraday was conceived as a brigadier, but was later demoted to colonel in later drafts. On July 14th, the series title was finalised as The Android Invasion. A familiar face was assigned to direct Serial 4J, Hinchcliffe's predecessor as producer Barry Letts. Barry Letts had been lined up to oversee a biography of Marie Curie, but when this became entangled in internal BBC politics, Letts was given work as a script doctor on various drama programmes. On January 21st, he had been commissioned to write a storyline for Doctor Who entitled The Prisoner of Time, but nothing really came of this. Finally, he secured permission to serve out the remainder of his BBC contract in a directorial capacity, and took the reins of The Android Invasion. Letts' previous directing credit on Doctor Who had been for the final third Doctor story, Planet of the Spiders, at the end of season 11. Letts began work on The Android Invasion with 5 days of location in Oxfordshire. July 21st was spent at the National Radiological Protection Board in Harwell, whose grounds served as those of the Defence Station. The next 2 days were devoted to scenes in the woods around the False Devonshire. The principal location was Tubney Wood in Tubney, although a small amount of work on the 22nd took place at Warsham Quarry in Witney. It was at Tubney Wood that Tom Baker performed a sequence in which he was submerged in a river. Unfortunately, Baker swallowed too much water and had to be taken to a hospital to have his stomach pumped. Finally, material set in Devonshire itself was filmed in the village of East Hagbourne on July 24th and 25th. Rejoining Doctor Who for the studio recordings were Ian Marter and John Levine. Ian Marter had just completed his regular engagement as Harry Sullivan in Doctor Who at the end of the 12th production block, and was making his only return to the programme. For Levine, The Android Invasion marked the last of a long series of regular appearances as Benton, dating back to 1968. Levine left the acting profession in 1977 and took up a number of different jobs: cruise line entertainer, head of an audiovisual company, and even a private detective. More recently, Levine moved to the United States and began acting again, including a role in the horror film Cannibalistic. Neither Marter nor Levine found The Android Invasion to be a pleasant experience, as the new production team's de-emphasis of the unit format had become progressively apparent. Levine also missed Nicholas Courtney's presence on set. The first studio session for The Android Invasion took place on Monday, August 11th and Tuesday the 12th in BBC Television Centre Studio 3. These days were chiefly concerned with taping the majority of episodes 1 and 2 respectively, although Part 3 scenes in the Kraals cell and corridor were recorded on the 11th, and sequences in the disorientation chamber and corridor from the same instalment were completed on the 12th. The second block was scheduled for exactly 2 weeks later, on August 25th and 26th. This time the venue was TC8. Again, Letts primarily concentrated on one episode each day, but also performed some shooting for other instalments. Part 2 scenes in Stigron's control room and the corridor of the defence centre were taped on the 25th. On the 26th, material in the scanner room from Part 1 and in the loading bay from Part 3 was also recorded. Unfortunately, Letts ran out of time on this day, resulting in the loss of a key scene from late in the final episode, which would have explained how the Doctor reactivated his android duplicates, as well as accounting for the Kraal invasion armada. The TARDIS arrives on the planet Poseidon, where the alien Kraals have created an exact replica of the English village of Devonsham and its nearby space defence station, and populated it with androids in order to rehearse for an invasion attempt. A human astronaut, Guy Crayford, has been duped into collaborating with them. The TARDIS travels on to Earth alone, and the Doctor and Sarah following Crayford's rocket, which is being used to carry the spearhead of the invasion force. The Kraals' chief scientist Stigron intends to release a deadly virus in order to weaken resistance to the forthcoming invasion. The android invasion is considered to be the weak link in Season 13 due to its callback to the Pertwee era, as opposed to more emphasis on Gothic horror. However, I don't think it makes the story necessarily terrible, but when compared to other stories of its time, it is considerably more lacking. It more or less feels like a story just there to fill 4 weeks of airtime, and feels pretty standard and generic. Tom Baker gives a more subdued performance as the Doctor. Now this may have been down to illness after Tom swallowing a lot of pond water. That's not to say Tom isn't trying as the Doctor, as he certainly gives a good performance. Where he really stands out is the android version of himself. Being able to switch from the android pretending to be the Doctor and then switching back to the android is pretty chilling, especially when he fires the gun.
Elizabeth Sladen gives a good performance as Sarah Jane, and for once it's nice to see the companion be aware of the location rather than the Doctor. Her story on Guy Crayford allows the viewers to be aware that she did have a life before meeting the Doctor. Her performance as the android Sarah is beautifully subtle as well, though it's rather stupid that the android version gives the Doctor a lot of information about the Kraal plan.
Either Stigron is very proud of his plan that he likes his androids to monologue routinely, or he's a bit of a numpty. The cliffhanger to Part 2 is very effective as the android face falls off and reveals the inner workings. It's a very disturbing image and shows how inhuman the androids are. Ian Marter and John Levine return briefly as Harry Sullivan and Sergeant Benton respectively. Sadly, neither of them exit the series in a blaze of glory, and their presence doesn't exactly feel unique to their characters. They could have been any generic unit personnel, and I feel nothing would have changed. Ian Marter discussed his disappointment with the serial in a 1984 interview. I didn't care for my last story, The Android Invasion, one little bit. There was no real reason for Harry to be in it at all. I couldn't see the point of it. My own unfulfilled wish was that Harry could have been blown up while trying to save Sarah Jane or something on those lines. A genuinely heroic exit instead of what I actually got. Their final lines are also really naff. Yes, and twin. When I look across units' time on the series, I find it odd how they were introduced in the invasion with such a dynamic introduction. Yet as we went through the years, the family just dropped slowly but surely, most of them not even getting an exit, just making an indefinite final appearance. St. John's plays astronaut Guy Crayford. Milton had previously appeared as Bennick in The Enemy of the World, and would go on to play Castellan Kellner in The Invasion of Time, though I'll always remember him as Mr. Rossiter from the Basil Brush Show.
Come on, open up! I know you're in there! I'll phone the landlord! No, I am the landlord!
Despite his good performance, his character and backstory is pretty inconsistent. The Kraals brainwash him into thinking that the humans have left him for dead, and they had to rebuild him, but leaving his eye still damaged. However, it's revealed at the end that his eye is perfectly fine, simply by taking off his eye patch. He's an astronaut who's been missing for 2 years, and he never took the patch off? What, he never took it off while he had a bath or a shower? The motivation is just really forced and contrived, so it's hard to sympathise with Crayford as a tragic figure. Martin Friend plays the Kraal leader Stigron. I quite like the design of the Kraal creatures themselves, even though their overall plan is pretty generic. They want to release a virus upon the Earth. Again, replace this with radiation/plague from previous Dalek stories, and it just feels very been there, done that. Even the idea of doppelgangers feels repeat from Terror of the Zygons. However, the performance is pretty good despite the makeup and standard motivation. Roy Skelton plays Stigron's underling Chidaki. Roy is best known in Doctor Who for voicing the Daleks and Cybermen in select stories, as well as the voice of Zippy and George on the children's TV series Rainbow. Patrick Newell plays Colonel Faraday, the leader of the Space Development Complex while the Brigadier is in Geneva. His appearance is almost a blessing in disguise. If it was the Brigadier, I felt Nicholas Courtney would also have been wasted by the script. The supporting cast do their best with the material they have, and I don't think anyone gives a bad performance. The actors themselves just aren't given that much to work with. The production work is pretty good. It's nice that they use Barry Letts' talents as a director, and it might be his best looking story for me. The location filming is probably my favourite aspect of this serial. The opening images of an android throwing himself off a cliff is really effective. I do find it a shame, however, that they slowed down the picture. It would have been stronger and probably more horrific if they let it flow at its natural pace. However, it is a family show, and that probably would have been too far for the series. I'm a personal sucker for village locations, so the filming work done in East Hagborn is really good. The summer location work doesn't distract from the atmosphere, but in my opinion adds to it, and makes the location work really stand out, and it's a nice contrast from the grey and monotonous sets of the Kraals spacecraft. It's an interesting idea of how bright and alive the human world is, compared to how monotonous the androids are, how all the individuality has been sapped in the fake village, despite being an exact replica. I think Barry's directing on the serial would have been more highly regarded had there been a better script, but there is solid direction here. Dudley Simpson once again provides a pretty good score that adds mystery to the atmospheric scenes and excitement in the action. My favourite score has to be when the Doctor and his android double fight it out in the control room. I like how bombastic the score becomes, similar to the Fourth Doctor's eccentric personality. Now the score is doubling down on both of them. The music for parts 3 and 4 can be found on the 50th anniversary CD, which you can buy for a reasonable price online, but be aware that it doesn't come with the full score for the entire serial. If I had to summarise the Android Invasion, it would be solid. The production values are solid, as are the plot, monsters and the acting. Sadly, the execution of its story is just really messy. Such as when Stigron is killed, the story just seems to come to an end. What happened to the rest of the Kraal invasion fleet? There's no mention of them giving up or being defeated. It's as if the writers just forgot about it. The androids are said to be indestructible, yet their faces fall off when they are tripped up. Crayford not realising his perfectly functioning eye, etc. It's interesting how Series 6 of the new series took images for its main story arc. Can't see the similarities? Here's what I mean. I suppose it's nice that even mediocre Doctor Who gets recognition. Despite my grievances with the Android Invasion, I don't think it's a bad story, it's just very uninspiring when compared to other stories of the season. While Terror of the Zygons also had elements of the previous era, it felt fresh, like it had those horror and gothic elements to keep it fresh within this new era, whereas this story feels like a Pertwee era story that happens to star Tom Baker. The Android Invasion is meat and potatoes Who. It's not going to blow you away with any sort of epicness, but with good performances and solid production values, it's likely to keep you entertained for a solid hour and a half. It's average Doctor Who. Nothing more, nothing less.